Why are you a vegan?
Okay, so I've talked about this a little bit with some of you before, although I would note not that many of you. I think that perhaps this is a question that some folks are afraid to ask me. I hope not, because they think I'll be offended. It's hard to offend me. So I was raised in a house of a very, very palate, actually, and Keith Gallion, who is here to testify to that, because he knows my folks very well, and in particular my mom and his wife Melissa, I'll get her to cook, and they're both very talented cooks and very far-ranging American fare and Indian food and French cuisine. They both really love French cuisine. So really a very broad attitude towards what we eat and what flavors are to be enjoyed. And I had a very, very narrow palate. I was like pepperoni pizza and French fries and hamburgers without the bun. I would eat the patty out of the bun and use the bun sort of like a holder. So that's something I was famous for, you know, in college. So I had a very, very narrow palate, but it was full of meat and dairy. So not at all vegan for most of my life. And then I met Sarah, who many of you know, my partner. And she was vegan at the time that we met. And she said that she gave up on me almost instantly. She could see that I was a lost cause. I mean, you know, I'm sitting across from her eating like 3 hamburgers in a row. And she just didn't try to change me. But I did a lot of listening to her because I cared about her a lot. You know, loved her during the whole time we were dating. I cared about her, of course, getting something to eat whenever we were at some place where we needed to figure out who's going to eat what. So I did a lot of looking out for her. I did a lot of thinking about the reason she told me about why she was a vegan. And eventually, I came to the conclusion that I agreed with her. So we had talked about the rights of animals. The animals shouldn't be treated as objects, they should be treated as ends in themselves. Talked about compassion and how having a sort of contempt for other beings to the point where you're willing to kill them doesn't teach people to be kind. It's actually a training ground for people to have a callous attitude towards life. And for my own part, I was developing my own thinking on this at this point. I was just thinking that I didn't. The only excuse I had left at this point was that I needed it. I couldn't possibly live without meat and dairy. Not because of dietary things, you know, being dietary science, you can live without dairy, but I couldn't do it myself because I wouldn't eat enough. You know, I'd be left with French fries. That's not the line to base a diet. And then when a little while before we got married, we moved to California right after we were out of college so that I could go to seminary. And we moved in together. So the first time we were actually living together. Before that, we'd been in student housing. And we were responsible for our own meals for the first time together, as opposed to eating the cafeteria. And I instantly became a vegetarian at home because I wasn't going to pay for the meat that I was going to eat. And I certainly was not going to clean up after the meat. So that was like automatic, because without thinking, you just didn't shop for me. That was easier than I thought it would be. And I was eating more of the meals that Sarah was preparing for both of us. And I was trying more food. And, you know, my mother's prayers were finally answered. My palate expanded with what I was willing to try and enjoy, and the flavors that I'd been very reticent about my whole childhood and adulthood, I finally opened myself up to. And just like on the day that I was starting seminary, basically, I realized that I didn't have that excuse anymore that I couldn't be vegan. I could live and be a vegan. It might be hard, it might be a little bit more expensive because meat and dairy in this country are subsidized, so they tend to be a little bit cheaper. But I want to stop working, I want to become vegan. And she was just thrilled. And I was like I said, she'd given up on me. But that was the moment. So I've been vegan for roughly the amount of time that I've been officially in the process of becoming a minister. So that means we're coming up on the 8th anniversary. So it's about 6 months longer than Sarah and I have been married. I've said this before, it's not necessarily the easiest thing to do. It's dissonant with the world around us. The world around us does not expect you to not eat meat and dairy. I'm doing a wedding this weekend, and they've been very accommodating to me in the reception, and I'm sure they will be at the event following the wedding this afternoon. But it's still not normal, and it's still not what we're set up for. But that sense of congruence, of having ideals and trying to live up to them instead of just saying, well, it's hard. There are a lot of barriers to it. I don't want to be faced with those challenges all the time. It would be easier to live the way that I live. That's what it was about. And so more than encouraging anyone else to become vegan, I think that there are benefits to it and there are reasons for it, and I wouldn't discourage someone from doing it. More than that, I would encourage all of you to think about the way in which your life can be more congruent with the values of the world.
All right, with this one, you can pick one or the other.
Okay.
The first one, does everyone have the power, authority, right, or mandate to forgive another for some breach? Or is this the providence of the divine? And if the answer to the first question is yes, does a person do this? A person does have this innate characteristic. Is there a situation where forgiveness is not warranted? And the alternative question is the square root of 1 over 100?
I asked specifically for no. Specifics, yes. Next week is having one of the RE classes next year is on the theology of the Simpsons, a show that has greatly influenced me. And their minister figure, the Reverend Lovejoy on there, he says a lot of things that stick with me. One of them is he answers a question like that. The short answer is no with an if, and the long answer is yes with a but. I think that forgiveness occurs most importantly between people, and I'm not on the edge on that. That's a pretty mainline theological statement, even for people with a very high, transcendent view of God. Still think that forgiveness has to happen between people. That's actually a requirement for reconciliation now in the Roman Catholic Church, that you first have to go and get forgiveness from the people that you've wronged. You wronged someone before you can get right with God. And so there's even if God's in the equation, people are still very deeply involved there. I think that we all have the power to forgive, and there is a good in forgiveness, not just for people being forgiven, but also for the forgiver. There's a letting go and releasing that allows them. And at the same time, we have to recognize that as mortals, there will always be the possibility of some harm that's so great that we can't even forgive somebody for it. And that has to be okay. When someone has been truly deeply wronged, holding the imperative of forgiveness over their head like a cudgel doesn't help anyone. And further, to be forgiven is not the end of the story. Forgiveness is not the same as forgetting, and it doesn't erase whatever was done wrong. So, there are things in my life that I've done that I'm deeply ashamed of, that I've been forgiven for. And I'm grateful for that forgiveness, but that doesn't remove that from me. The whole rest of my life is shaped in part by my determination to be better than that prior action, and to make up for it in some sense by my future behavior.
This one has a little bit of a political bent. I was forced into the Army due to the draft back in 1969. Back then, I always opposed the draft. Today, I feel our all-volunteer military has led to huge apathy with long wars. In a better world, we would not need armies. What are your thoughts on the military draft as a means to ensure that all citizens
there's space for strict pacifism in Unitarian Universalism. And there are several of our theological ancestors were strict pacifists. No violence of any kind, absolutely no waging of war. In some cases, not even personal self-defense. Really pure pacifism. And that is a strand in our tradition, and if you hold that position, there's space for you. I am not a strict pacifist in that I do condone self-defense, and that includes self-defense on an institutional or national scale. So I think that there is such a thing as a necessary. I'm not sure that I would go so far as to call it just. War, by its nature, involves taking life, and that can never be a good thing. It can sometimes be a necessary thing to prevent a greater evil. But I think that we let ourselves off the hook too easily if we pretend that there isn't still a wrong in killing. That's why to be a soldier is one of the greatest sacrifices that a person can make, because they're not only taking on the danger to their own life, putting themselves in harm's way in order to defend others, but taking on the moral weight of having taken lives. And that weight needs to be shared not only with the people who serve in the military, but with all the people who send them off to war. All the people of the country who are benefiting from the service of those soldiers. So, I think I'm getting a little far away from the question. About the draft. I have some personal issues with the way the current military is structured. I think that it does serve to hide a lot of the impact of war, particularly the mental health impact of war and the toll of suicide from most of the population, and sort of paint over it. To get into specifics about that is like, that's a little bit outside my purview. I don't try to give you complex